Hey, welcome to another session of Dr. Susie's Security Second. This time we're going to talk about attacks and attackers. So attacks, those can be everything from worms, viruses, malware. Ransomware is kind of a newer one, and that's, of course, where they take your data and they encrypt it. They won't give it back until you pay them a ransom. We have lots of vulnerabilities still out there, both in terms of, operating systems. Sometimes there's patching issues. There's also denial of service and distributed denial of service attacks. And these are when they want to disrupt your ability to communicate or your network to work. Then we have identity theft and social engineering and lots more, which we will get into a little bit more later on. So a cybersecurity attack, it's a deliberate malicious attempt to breach, disrupt, or damage a system, network, or digital device, right? So typically these are carried out by what we call threat actors. And that can be an individual hacker. It could be an organized criminal group. It could even be a state-sponsored entity, which we'll talk more about a little bit later on. But the idea here is they're going to exploit technical vulnerabilities or human error in the effort of getting their goals achieved. So most cyber attacks, they are launched for one or more reasons. Number one is money, financial gain. So they want to steal money directly. They want to sell your stolen data, credit card numbers, anything like that on the dark web, or they want to extort victims through ransomware. So number one is money. Number two is data theft. If they pilfer sensitive information like intellectual property or trade secrets, or even personal information like social security numbers, that data can be lucrative for them. It can be a source of intelligence if it's another company that wants to get ahead, or it could be a source of, again, back to number one, money, financial gain. So financial gain, data theft. The third reason that people do this is service disruption. And that's overwhelming, or disabling systems to kind of halt business operations. And a lot of times that's done for political reasons or to cause chaos. And then the fourth reason is espionage. So long-term stealthy campaigns, again, often state-sponsored, which we will get into those particular folks a little bit later on, with the idea to gather intelligence or monitor rival governments and corporations. And then the last reason that people do this is ideology or hacktivism. And this is promoting a social or political cause. And the idea here is they're going to deface a website or leak some embarrassing information. So common types of attack, phishing is a big one. Phishing is, of course, they're trying to manipulate you into giving them information, right? This is a fraudulent email or a message. It's usually like very stressful, must be done immediately, and it tricks users into revealing login credentials or downloading malware. Malware, of course, is another one, and that's malicious software, and that's viruses, worms, spyware, and the whole thing is to gain access, unauthorized access, or damage. Ransomware we talked about before. Of course, that is encrypting the files and demanding a payment or a ransom. Just denial of service, I mentioned that a little bit earlier too. It's flooding a server or a network with excessive traffic to crash it and to make it unavailable to legitimate users. Then we have something called man-in-the-middle attacks, and this is where the hacker actually intercepts private communications between two different parties. So they insert themselves between the parties. So what happens is, I'm sending an email to you. I think it's going directly to you, but it's actually going to the hacker. And then the hacker forwards it on to you. And in the meantime, the hacker is reading everything we're saying back and forth as they grabs the conversation and then forwards it on. So we have no idea, right? SQL injection is another one, and this is inserting malicious code into a website's input fields to kind of trick the database to give up sensitive data. Zero-day exploits, these are a fun one, right? These are brand new. We've never seen them before. They've not been out in the wild. There's no signatures to detect them. They're brand new, and there's no available patches. So 0 days are really big and concerning. So cyber attacks have really been frequent and costly. I think, the global cost of cybercrime, they're saying it's going to be over, $13 trillion by 2028, right? And so we're looking at things like AI-powered attacks. Hackers are starting to use generative AI to create really hyper-realistic phishing emails. And they're also using AI to automate the discovery of system vulnerabilities. And a new trend is they're targeting infrastructure, right? So we're seeing more attacks on critical services like power grids and water treatment plants and healthcare systems. And then we also have more supply chain attacks, and this is targeting third-party vendors to gain indirect access to the larger client that they work for. So a couple more about different types. Insider threat is a big one. So this could be a disgruntled employee. It could be a corporate spy. It could be someone who just made a mistake. But insider threat is really, really dangerous because they have inside knowledge of the system. They're already in there. They have the credentials to get in. If they're malicious, they know the corporate control mechanisms and how to avoid detection. And a lot of times the manager may run interference because they're trusted. So this could be sabotage, financial theft, hacking, intellectual property theft, extortion, harassment, abuse of computer systems, and more and more and more. So insider threat, again, it could be both a malicious thing where it's an intentional attack against that organization, or it could be a simple mistake. You clicked on the wrong link and downloaded malware into your environment. All right, social engineers, we have a whole slide on them coming up next. So I'm going to save those just for a minute. Script kiddies, these are folks that don't have technical knowledge. They point and click, they use apps that are free and a lot of times publicly available, right? Sometimes they're on the dark web. Sometimes they are for cost, right? But these are not professional hackers, all right? Then we've got cyber vandals, and these are the folks that damage for enjoyment. We've got criminals, and of course, they want the financial profit. We've got our hacktivists who hack with a purpose in mind. Think about Anonymous, and there'll be more about them coming up too. And then APT, which is Advanced Persistent Threat. And you heard me mention earlier about the nation state, funded kind of attackers. APT is another term for them, and we will talk a bit about them. All right, the social engineer, right? A lot of people think this is specifically a hacker. Not necessarily. This is manipulation, right? So Kevin Mitnick wrote a book called The Art of Deception, and he talks about how influence and persuasion is all part of the social engineer and how there are other roles outside of hacking that fits the description. Chris Hagnaghi also wrote a book called Social Engineering, The Art of Human Hacking, right? And this was back in 2010, but still very relevant. And he talks about different types of social engineers, right? Hackers, pen testers, spies, identity thieves, disgruntled employees, scam artists. But then there's some legitimate folks in there, like salesmen or executive recruiters or governments or doctors or psychologists or lawyers. All right, so sometimes manipulation is done for good, right? When we talk about social engineering in cybersecurity, we're really talking about manipulation done for bad. So a social engineer, they're going to be able to influence and persuade people. They're very good at deceiving. They have really good people skills. People like them, and they're able to distract people. Right. Now, remember, security is kind of an illusion in some ways. It's not a product. It's a process, right? And security is we talk about security, it's people, it's management, it's technology. Typically, it's not a technology problem. We're talking about a people problem. So there's a popular saying that a secure computer is one that's turned off, right? But the idea here is that you can just turn it back on. You can get someone to convince you to turn it back on. So it's really not that simple. So we have to think about the human factor. And so in the United States, right, everybody here is kind of taught to love thy neighbor, and we want to be helpful. We're not suspicious of each other, and because of that human nature makes us want to help, especially when the request is reasonable. And social engineers, they rely on this, right? So let's move on to social engineering a little bit more here, right? So the benefits of social engineering is, hey, you get better at communicating. You learn to read facial expressions and how to use questions, and you put people at ease. You become a good listener, and you're more aware of people's feelings. So it's practice, right? And that's the benefits of it. But of course, it can be used for the negative as well. So Mitnick said that social engineering uses influence and persuasion to deceive people by convincing them that the social engineer is someone he is not, or by manipulation. So as a result, the social engineer is able to take advantage of people to obtain information with or without the use of technology. So let's talk about some common social engineering scams. Phone is a really common one, right? So they're going to call up and pretend to be someone who needs help, someone who's really important. Help desks are especially vulnerable here because they're trained to be friendly and to give out information, right? Receptionists as well. Shoulder surfing is another one, like if you're, using your laptop on a plane, it's very easy for someone behind you to see what's on your laptop. Dumpster diving, this one's a little old school, right? But people still throw stuff of value away. And that could be company phone books, org charts, memos, policy manuals, calendars of meetings, events, and vacations. It could be printouts of sensitive data. And so if you put that in the trash, hackers can go get it. And so that's why a lot of companies have gone to these shredding, where you put your stuff into a big box and then a company comes and shreds that information for you, right? Online forums or sweepstakes scams. This kind of preys on the idea that a lot of people use the same password for multiple accounts. So if they can con you into giving up one, it's likely that that one's going to be good for other websites as well. And so they just have to figure out what else, you log into. All right, we did talk a little bit about the phone. Email scams are the same kind of situation as the phone, and especially with help desks where they call in for help and there's a crisis and a press, right, and an immediate need. All right, moving off social engineers, kind of. Let's talk about Anonymous. So Anonymous is a decentralized international network of digital activists and hacktivists, right? So they've done a couple of high-profile cyber attacks. They use distributed denial of service. They do website defacements. They do data leaks against, governments, corporations, and institutions, right? So their common tactics are distributed denial of service floods, right? Data breaches where they exfiltrate and publicly release classified or internal documents, emails, and records. They also do website defacement where they replace target organizations' homepages with political messages, right? So they're pretty well known. They've done a couple really big ones. In 2008, they did Project Chinology, where they widespread protests and distributed denial of service attacks against the Church of Scientology. In 2010, they did Operation Payback. And so they did a digital assault on Visa, MasterCard, and PayPal after they cut off services to WikiLeaks. In 2011 through 2012, so sometimes, because it's long-term, and we'll talk about this, they can also be considered APT, Advanced Persistent Threat, because they're not always in and out. So for almost a year, they did AntiSec, and this is where they collaborated with other groups to infiltrate law enforcement, government, and intelligence contractor databases. And then 2022, they did cyber operations against Russia, and they coordinated campaigns targeting Russian government ministries, state media, the corporate infrastructure, and that was after the invasion of the Ukraine. So the Anonymous Collective, they're kind of like a terrorist cell, how they function, but they're kind of not, right? Both use decentralized hidden networks to avoid law enforcement, right? So neither group has a single visual headquarters or main boss that gives direct orders. And then there's anonymity for both. Members use masks, alias, and encrypted tools to hide their real identities. And then it's autonomous. So small groups or individuals can launch actions on their own if they support the main idea of the anonymous group. Very similar that you would see with a terrorist cell. Of course, the big difference is that, Anonymous is more of a hacktivist, more political, typically. And terrorist cells, of course, they're after violence and murder to create fear and achieve political or religious goals. So way more extreme are the terrorists than Anonymous, right? Now, Anonymous has no formal enrollment test or strict loyalty oath, but the terrorists do. And then, of course, Anonymous attacks, they're attacking websites, leaking documents, defacing online pages. They're not actually physically harming or causing loss of life like a terrorist would. So they function similar as terrorist cells, but there's also, the intent and the amount of damage is a bit different. So speaking of advanced persistent threat, let's get into this. So APT was created by U.S. Air Force analysts in 2006, right? And it stands for Advanced Persistent and Threat. Advanced meaning the attacker is really, really good. So they can create custom exploits, like zero-day attacks against a particular organization, right? So the goal then is persistent, long term. They don't want to be detected. They want to stay in there for a while, and they have a threat, which means they're organized, funded, motivated, and have opportunity. And the threat piece is where the nation state comes in, or a large corporation, right? So this is really spying. This is espionage. So APTs are forms of espionage that facilitate access to digital assets. Right. It doesn't include sabotage. They just want the information. They clean up the record of their visit. Right. They do everything to remain undetected. Right. Just like other hackers do in some cases, but they're in there much, much longer. And there's actually been stories about how some APT have defended the networks they're in from outside attackers so they don't lose their intelligence feed. Right. So APT, like a lot of other attacks, one of the most common ways in is phishing, right? So social engineering and phishing, right? So there's two types of APTs. There's criminal ones, and they target personal identity and or financial information. And then there's competitive, and this is industry or state-sponsored intelligence services. And in some countries, the intelligence services and the corporations work together, or they're kind of one in one, right? All right, and in that case, they're going to target proprietary information like trade secrets and intellectual property. So let's talk about one of the first ones, really, really well known. So this is Operation Aurora. This was an APT campaign, and it was like Google, Juniper, Adobe, and 29 others. And this was about 2010. So this went on for as long as 6 months. It started with a targeted spear phishing email to company employees with a link to a Taiwanese website, which hosted malicious JavaScript, right? And so it looked like it was from Taiwan, right? But then analysts suspect it was actually from China, right? There were some indicators based on the shell code that they used and the backdoor commands. It traced back to 2 Chinese schools, right? So the malware that they used was called Hydrack, and today AB signatures are written for it, but of course back then it wasn't. And so this was embarrassing, really, really embarrassing to some of these big name companies. And this kind of was the seeds of zero trust. And if you're not familiar with zero trust, don't worry. I'll come up with a video on that shortly and explain it, but that's a whole nother long topic. All right, APT Anonymous, right? So they did, we talked about Anonymous, kind of like how they're, very similar to a terror cell in some ways. So we're going to talk about a couple of their attacks. So they did Operation Russia, which was a cyber war against Russia, against Russia. And it was the distributed denial service attacks against Russia. And so what they did is they knocked out the Russian government, banking, state media websites, and they hijacked state TV channels to broadcast banned war footage and then leak, website data from military branches and corporations. They also protested. They did some protests in April 2011. You may remember Operation Sony. So they protested Sony's civil lawsuit against the hacker George Hotz. He jailbroke into PlayStation 3. So they flooded Sony's public websites with traffic to take them offline. All right, and another one, right? So let's talk about cybercrime syndicates for a second. So major cybercrime syndicates and APT groups, they're often tied to specific countries, right? So some notable ones are Evil Corp, Fancy Bear, Lazarus, and APT 41. So Evil Corp and Fancy Bear are Russian associated. So they're Evil Corp's a financially motivated cybercrime syndicate, and they do massive banking malware and ransomware campaigns. Fancy Bear, also known as APT 28, it's more of a cyber espionage group, and it's linked with Russian military intelligence agencies. And then let's talk. Oh, there's one more that I didn't put on the slide. So there's Dark Side, Black Matter, and these is it's a ransomware as a service cartel, and it operates pretty much within Russian speaking, areas. Then we've got Lazarus Group, which is a North Korean associated syndicate, and they're a cybercrime collective, and they do high-profile cryptocurrency thefts, bank heists, and destructive malware attacks. And then we've got APT38, which is a specialized subgroup of Lazarus, and it's focused on financial institutions, thefts of that. And so it's more globally. Then we've got APT41, which is Chinese associated. It's a China one. And it's a hybrid group that conducts state-sponsored cyber espionage. And it also does some, financially motivated cybercrime too. And they do everything from healthcare to video game currencies. Also in China is APT31, and this is a Beijing-linked contractor group, and they do long-term computer intrusion campaigns against political figures, dissidents, and critical infrastructure abroad. There's a couple other groups out there. There's Handala, which is an Iranian group, and they are aligned with the Iranian state intelligence, and they focus on regional adversaries and infrastructure disruption. So that's about it. That's all I'm going to do for today. I try to keep these a little bit short. So in a nutshell, there's some information about different types of attacks and attackers, and I will follow this up with some more videos. Thanks for listening, and have a great rest of your day.